Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode for Umineko, and this is going to be the final one to close out episode 3. And so this is going to talk about the tea party and the extra tea party for the end of episode 3, and I have read some spoilers on thoughts about the mystery that I will then discuss at the very end. But this video will contain full spoilers for all of Umineko, not just episode 3, so don't listen if you have not played the whole thing. You will not be able to follow it. We get a conversation here where there's a funny setup of Lambda Delta being extremely childish, and then Beatrice and Bernkastel making fun of her, and then as soon as Bernkastel leaves, Lambda Delta turns on sicko mode and is threatening to Beatrice, is basically insisting that Beatrice should fall in line with how she wants her to behave. And there's something kind of funny and interesting in this moment about public and private faces and the differing public faces people have in different situations. Because obviously, in the arrangement where all three of them are together, Lambda Delta then is very cutesy and childish and plays up this kind of silly thing where she's like, who was that mysterious new character at the end? Even though it is clearly meant to be blatantly obvious. And on the off chance the reader did not pick it up, they're about to be straight up told it. But then when Bernkastel leaves, Lambda Delta switches modes because she is playing that persona for Bernkastel, not for Beatrice. And specifically, there's a power dynamic too, where Bernkastel and Lambda Delta are in somewhat of a power struggle, but Lambda Delta gave Beatrice her power. Lambda Delta holds the actual power in that situation. In one sense, Lambda Delta could be the person with the pile of gold who ultimately decides what Beatrice is going to do, even if Beatrice is attempting to circumvent that or play around with what her remit is. But too, there's a funny parallel to this where Lambda Delta acts very childish, hiding a kind of way more sinister and serious undercurrent, where Beatrice is in some ways doing the opposite, where she acts out this character of being a sinister villain, when underneath she is actually quite childish and inexperienced in reality. But specifically, there is the way in which Lambda Delta insists to Beatrice, you don't get to treat me in this way. This is something I offer only to Bernkastel. This is a face for Bernkastel, but not for you. And as well, there's the implication with how Lambda Delta talks about bestowing power to Beatrice. How Beatrice was not a witch before and was in a pretty wretched situation. I believe she calls her a truly shabby creature. There's something there in the way in which Beatrice has been elevated into a witch. She now has power, she has control, she is in this special status where she can play a game and she can have fun with Battler and challenge him, and ultimately she is in a position where she can present the game board for Battler to solve. All of which are things she did not have before. She has been given these things. But these things all have strings attached because Lambda Delta doesn't care about any of those other intentions Beatrice might have. Lambda Delta's here to say, I just want you to literally trap my girlfriend. I want her to be crushed and unable to escape and completely lost in your game over and over again. And Lambda Delta has given this gift, but the gift is not a one-time event. The gift can be withdrawn. To me, there's a parallel here to the ultimate crisis of Beatrice as a person. Even if she found a situation where someone was able to accept her, if she decided to have a life as Shannon or Cannon, if she wanted to make a future with George or Jessica, if they were happy and they thought they could accept her, the possibility forever exists of shattering that. George could kill Shannon if at some point he says he doesn't think it's real. He doesn't believe she exists, or doesn't believe her history makes sense. It might not even be as specific as saying outright, you are mentally ill, or anything like that. But we've seen the way George didn't believe in magic and would constantly make that clear even when he thought he was being respectful. Even in the moments where he was like, oh, I should go along with this because it's her silly little thing. He's showing her a disrespect, and it could be very easy for that disrespect to shatter the idea that she is a person. And so, just by being given the gift of personhood does not mean she is secure. The insecurity is not going to be easy to get rid of, and given the life situation she's in, given the fragment hunting that Bernkastel is going to have to do for episode 7, it's very hard to find a situation where she has any real security. Speaking of insecurity, we move on to the next section of the tea party, with the truly tragic fate for Ava and Anji, where, as the only living relatives of each other, I know technically Anji has her extended family, but family is more than just a blood relation, and I get no sense that she has an actual family tie to them. Even though she might hate Ava, but she still understands the way in which they are of the same family. Ava's wretched existence is tragic. Ava, just like Anji, was a victim of the tragedy of Rakanjima. I think it's still technically debatable whether the events of the Season 7 Tea Party are strictly speaking the literal, objective truth of the events that happened. I think it's a pretty accurate representation of how involved or culpable you should consider Ava to be. Where Ava is a woman who might scheme or machinate a little bit, but Ava is not a ruthless killer at the very least. And so she loses her family, she is in this situation where she is also maybe not totally innocent and comes out profiting off of it. Ava must have the worst survivor's guilt, where, especially with the way the media plays it, oh, Ava won out. And because of the way that media demonizes Ava as a character, there's no compassion for the idea that she lost her husband and her son. Those almost get whisked away because the way these narratives tend to work, there needs to be a culprit, there needs to be a witch, someone to be hunted. And since Ava is the only survivor, it is natural. And since Ava is the only known survivor, it is natural to think of her as the target, because it is so much less satisfying to think of the idea of a culprit who failed to actually succeed or get away. Though, we'll get to more of the mystery stuff as it comes up in the back half. There may be some contingent of people who are like, what if there was another person who's hidden and was never found? Because obviously the explosion creates the perfect sealed box where you can't even be sure which victims are which. As you maybe can tell, I do have a fairly compassionate read of Ava in this situation. Again, I would not say free of guilt, but especially with the general read of episode 8, and in particular Ava's presence in that episode and seeing the more compassionate read of her, it must pretty much suck to be in this situation. And I think the episode 3 prior to this primes you to be in Anji's perspective, but I think reading this tea party from the perspective of Ava is very distinctly different. For one, Ava's been put in an impossible situation. She talks about how it doesn't matter what she does with her money, people are just going to call her greedy, and that in itself is indicative of the fact that people see her away and her actions are independent of that. She is not the determinant of if people like her or not. Or even just, are they willing to leave her alone? The answer is just going to be no. Ava's entire life was about her family. There is an extent to which she had an ambition to become the family head, and I don't think that's a false ambition. I think that still somewhat rings true to her, but that's an ambition that requires her family exist. She needs to be in charge to be the family head. She needs to have a family, her husband and her son right next to her, in order for that position to mean anything. The fact that she is the only one left and she is the de facto heir doesn't mean anything, because her struggle in her early life was not about wanting a title or money. Her struggle was trying to prove that she was more competent than Kraus, which it seems like was true and was just not being acknowledged. There is no achievement in just falling into it and then knowing that her siblings, her husband, her son, none of them are around to get any good of it. The one person in her family that she could technically still reach out to is Anji, who fully buys into the same narrative of Ava as a witch. Anji, just like the general public, wants a culprit, a singular culprit they can point at and call a villain. She wants something simple. She wants something that doesn't at all compromise her own family. She needs to have a person to focus her blame on. And crucially, she keeps asking Ava, tell me what happened that night. Now again, regardless of the exact specifics of episode 7, the main reason for Ava not to tell Anji what happened that night is to protect Anji. In her dying moments, obviously she doesn't literally die this night, but this conversation would be the perfect place for Ava to tell Anji the shit that her own family got up to. Anji's own parents. But Ava does not. I think this is an act of compassion even as Ava plays up the role of being the witch. Ava leans into her personification because she has nothing truly left and she has learned not to attempt to deny it, and because, like earlier, Ava is deeply insecure and so lashes out at other people. But even at that, she never deploys the most powerful weapon she has against Anji. Now, there's an extent to which maybe you could make an argument that Anji just simply wouldn't believe her anyway, but that doesn't stop that wounding. Ava could say, actually, Kyrie was the mastermind who killed everybody and I just managed to kill her first and escape unscathed myself. And Anji probably wouldn't believe that. But there would be a part of Anji that wonders if that was true. The mistake Ava makes is thinking that if she never discusses it, that Anji will just have to move on and keep the good memories and her good understanding of her parents, her happy times, and never replace them with the knowledge of exactly what happened on the island. But Anji is too determined for that. Anji will never drop it. She cannot move past it. This deeply traumatic event is lodged in her brain as something she will never move away from until she gets an objective, airtight, 100% truth. Until that happens, she will rake over it. We will see over the course of some tea parties the ways in which she does dig deeper into this when motivated by her meeting with Bernkastel. But up to this point, she has simply stubbornly asked Ava to tell her what happened and never dropped the subject. In fact, Ava says in a cleverly ambiguous way, when Anji asks about the truth of what happened that day, Ava says, "Oh yes, that is the best way I have to harass you, isn't it? What happened on that day? You want to know what they said before they died, right?" It is the best way she has to harass Anji, and telling her would be more harassment than just simply never answering the question. And this leads into Anji making a deal with the devil. How literal or metaphorical that is, we'll leave for later. And Bernkastel has a funny squirrely language here. It was interesting to play this without context of Higurashi originally. Mild, vague spoilers for Higurashi at this point, I suppose. Nothing too deep, but just skip 30 seconds if it matters. Where, now rereading it, I get the sense you're supposed to see Bernkastel as an ally and on your side. She's going to be one of the major villains, so that tension is pretty fun. But the first time through, I just thought, yes, she seems to be mostly on the level here. She's helping against the villain. That's great. That ain't what she's doing. She just wants to win her game, and she's trying to pull any piece she can, and by the end of next episode, we're going to see a pretty cruel fate for Anji, and Bernkastel is going to be instrumental into enacting that very cruel fate. And in this scene, if you read it with a little bit more skepticism, Bernkastel uses some pretty squirrely language, where she avoids promising anything too concrete. She spends more time just trying to incite what she knows are Anji's wants and needs, and when you read this line, it's pretty clear. I'm giving you a chance for revenge. In exchange, I promise to search for and bring you the happiest resolution among the possibilities you're capable of accepting. Which is interesting, because it means that Anji could not be shown the main part of episode 7 because she wouldn't accept it. Like I said, Anji is looking for an objective, complete truth. A truth that is unassailable. But she's not going to like the tea party of episode 7. And she likes it even less when that's technically set up as being questionable. But it doesn't matter what the real truth is, what the golden truth, what the red truth. None of that matters to Anji as much as what she is capable of acknowledging, what she is willing to believe in, because she's probably heard multiple versions of things by now, but she clearly doesn't believe the accident angle and needs to know something more concrete. And so Bernkastel can offer that, even if it's not really going to be satisfying to Anji when she learns it, because really what Anji wants is her family back. But absent that, the thing she instead searches for is some sort of firm grasp on events. And Bernkastel specifically avoids any promises or mentions of odds with reference to bringing Anji's family back. Now, again, in the similar vein, if you read this skeptically, this is because she has no hope of bringing any of Anji's family back. The obvious reason for that being they're all dead. But again, having finished the game, they're not dead in the way that means that there is no physical way to bring these people back. But Battler is gone. I forget if Toya is the only name he uses, or if there's another name that's not a pen name that the character at the end of the game uses, but Battler is dead and has been replaced by Toya. And there is a chance in this moment that Bernkastel theoretically could find a future with Battler revived, but I think more likely she knows that is not a potential outcome. And also, Anji is not positioned as a person to understand that kind of revival. Especially not in this moment when it's so early in her story. And that takes us through to Anji leaping off the roof and us later getting a funny, not retcon, but like a funny tag on to this scene that, oh yeah, but she survives because of a 1 in a million miracle. Episode 3 as a whole I find very interesting for really starting to bring Beatrice's arc towards a conclusion. In a lot of ways I feel like the next episode, the end of the question arcs, is going to answer the question of Beatrice, but we're clearly seeing the beginnings of setting up Anji as a new protagonist. At the end of the day, it's Anji's story, as far as I'm concerned, in the back half. Battler's story is mostly as an observer. He is a character arc in a sense, but he is more of a point of view character to run through events. Anji and Beatrice are the two primary people we care about, who we've come to understand and get to see, learn and grow. We're going to see that ramp up on both accounts a ton in episode 4, so that's going to be a lot of fun. Even though episode 4 is so long, and there's so many bad things happening, and it took so long for me to play through episode 4 the first time, and I'm sure it won't this time, because a lot of that was me taking breaks and playing short sections, and a little bit of me going, when are we going to get to the fireworks factory, because I wanted to get back to the murder solving. But It's a rough one, no matter what. And at the time, too, I found the pacing weird because I didn't understand why Angie/Maria was getting such a massive amount of focus, even though they were clearly important characters. But it makes more sense to me now, having understood that basically we're overlapping the arcs where we need to big up Angie, who is going to disappear a little bit, but then come back at the end to be the real finale character. Oh, and one final thing for this episode. I keep making fundamental assumptions in my whodunits that I think are interesting, especially because in this case, I kind of didn't make the assumption to begin with, but then I fully fell into this camp and never rethought it. The main thread that people brought out in the spoiler comments was the idea that Beatrice and Ava were never collaborating. So this is a part that I just fully glossed over, where it never occurred to me that there was no point of collaboration. Now, it was clear that there was no way in which Beatrice might have been sitting in the Golden Land for her to meet Ava and talk to her, because we know that Rosa went in too. So if there's a person in there and it was directly after Ava went in, they would have both been in there. So instead, Beatrice was actually still operating her original murder game up until Ava started killing people, and Beatrice was like, oh, so she's discovered the Golden Land. She's just not told anybody. She's keeping it a secret. And there are points at which Beatrice attempts to mask the situation to make murder games. One thing someone said was that it was quite likely that in the firefight between Rudolph, Kyrie, Hideyoshi, and Ava, it is probable that Hideyoshi got shot but wasn't strictly speaking dead until Beatrice approached and then killed him basically, while Ava was off trying to quickly build a narrative so that they could drag Dr. Nanjo out of the house, etc., etc. Which makes sense, which I don't think is, strictly speaking, necessary for being able to make Hideyoshi die, but definitely fits neater, and then would mean that all of the stakes being planted there in that moment are fully planted after the fact. Even before, it was pretty clear to me that Ava didn't really give a shit about the murder game angle of things, but that Beatrice seemed to be still enacting it upon any victims that had come about. But this also makes a little bit more sense of the George situation, where they're not collaborating. Beatrice is not somehow killing George in tandem with what Ava is doing. Beatrice is just doing the murder game. Someone else needs to die. She doesn't know that Ava has gone off to kill Nazi and Kraus. At which point Beatrice has to go, well, I guess these two need stakes, because these were the last Twilights, and I've already killed somebody else. Oh well. It did otherwise seem pretty straightforward to me. I look forward to the mystery of the fourth game, because I remember finding it utterly baffling when reading the first time, and I had not fully internalized the lesson of magic. I had not copped to the idea that things shown on screen were absolutely not meant to be read as fact. So, especially as people comply with the narrative about there being literally hidden trapdoors that are utterly impossible, I look forward to untangling that stuff now that I have a much better sense of what's going on. Because in retrospect, I can't remember if the mystery of part 4 is actually very simple or very complicated. But otherwise, that's going to do it for this episode. We're 3 out of 8 done, and as I said, we're going on to a long one next, but that'll put us at close enough to halfway. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not quite half, but it must not be that far off. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.